second Sunday of Lent, we will directly come to the Gospel passage today taken from Mark chapter 19, 9 verses 2 to 10. And this Gospel passage is also found in other two synoptics, Matthew as well as Luke. Luke chapter 9 verse 28 to 36 and Luke chapter 17 verses 1 to 10. Now when we look at these three passages found in synoptics, we find more or less the same explanation of the event that happened on a high mountain. Now when we look at these explanations difference, we need to go back a little to these gospel passages. If you read Luke's gospel as well as Matthew's gospel, we find an event that happened at Caesarea Philippi. When Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do the people say that I am?" They answered him, "Some say you are Elijah, some say you are John the Baptist, others say you are one of the prophets of old." And Jesus asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" And there Peter confesses, "You are the Messiah, you are the Son of God." And there Jesus replies, "Peter, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who has revealed this to you." Now when we look at this, after 6 days of that event, they climbed this mountain. Now about this mountain, there are a lot of disputes whether it is Mount Tabor or any other mountain. But some experts say, because the previous event happened in Caesarea Philippi, most probably a high mountain around there is Mount Hermon. But some of them say it is too difficult to climb Mount Hermon because it is so high. And consequently, experts again reflect and say it should be Mount Tabor. Now, if you go to Holy Land, today we see the Transfiguration mountain is Mount Tabor and no other mountain. Now looking at this climbing of the mountain with these three disciples, why Jesus chose these three disciples, John, James and Peter? Because it is said that John, James and Peter were forming the inner circle of Jesus. They were very close. Why they were close? On various occasions, when Jesus worked out miracles and when Jesus prayed alone, they were the ones who were present. Now for example, when Jesus raised Jairus' daughter from death, there these three disciples were present. When Jesus went to the house of Peter, when Peter's mother-in-law was sick, there those three disciples were present. When Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was praying, there those three disciples were present. Now on this mount, when Jesus was transfigured, we find these three disciples. Now when we look at this climbing of the mountain, why Jesus climbed the mountain? Because it was in the Old Testament, it is said that God would be found on the mountain. That's why if you go to the Old Testament, refer to Exodus, where Moses found God in the burning bush, it was on a mountain. Where Moses received the 10 commandments, on a mountain. Where Elijah massacred all the prophets of Baal, on Mount Carmel. Where did he run from Queen Jezebel? It was to Mount Horeb. He went and hid in one of the caves there. And even in the life of Jesus we find mountain was very important. Where did he preach the Beatitudes? On Mount of the Beatitudes. He was transfigured on a mountain. He was crucified on a mountain. And then he ascended up into heaven from a mountain. So the mountain was very significant in the Old Testament as well as during the time of Jesus for an experience with God. And that's why Jesus along with his disciples, they climbed the mountain. And as soon as they reached the mountain, Jesus enters into prayer. And what happens then? Now the whole body of Jesus is filled with light. And that is what we read. The light was so powerful, no bleach on earth could clean it. And that's why the power of God descending on Jesus. He was full of light, transfigured. You know, the word transfigured is also explained with another word, metamorphosis. Trans is across, figure is figura, change of the figure. You know, we also use another word, metanoia, change of heart. Metamorphosis, change, transfiguration. The figure is changed here, full of light. Now, when we look at the light, some of the experts, the church fathers say that this particular event in the life of Jesus of transfiguration was meant for the disciples to understand how Jesus would be glorified in his resurrection. And that's why it's a pointer to resurrection. It's a pointer also to ascension. Because Jesus would be sitting on the right hand of the Father. Why resurrection? Now, John, the apostle, does not mention about the transfiguration in his gospel. We find in Luke, Matthew and Mark, but John's gospel we do not find. But there is an indirect reference to the glory of Jesus. If you refer John chapter 1, verse 14, we will find that John confessing that we have seen the glory of God in Jesus. We have seen his glory. Now refer Revelation chapter 1 verse 14. You will find the Son of God sitting on the throne surrounded by 7 lambs. And his face and his hair was looking like snow, white as wool. And there was light coming out of his eyes. Now what we learn here, the transformed, glorified figure of the Son of God. Now there on the mountain, there appear 2 individuals, Elijah and Moses. Why Moses and Elijah? Representing law and the prophets. Now, here there is a point for our reflection, dear friends. When we look at Moses, you know, Moses was a sinful man. You know, he had killed an Egyptian and buried under the sand. Then in the desert, he doubted about the word of God. Because when people were crying for water in the desert, God ordered Moses, Moses, you strike the rock with the rod. And I will show to people that I can give them water in the desert. And Moses gathered all the elders around him, and he was about to strike the stone with the rod. But he made a mistake. What was the mistake? Instead of striking once, he doubted and struck it the second time. And that was really a disrespect for God. God had said, strike the stone. And he doubted and did it twice. And God punished Moses. And what was the punishment? Moses, because you doubted my word, you will not enter the promised land. He was not allowed. He was allowed just to see the promised land from far away, but he was not given the privilege of entering the promised land. But in today's event, he had the privilege to come back to the promised land. That means he appears on Mount Tabor. And what about Elijah? Elijah was a fiery prophet who had killed all the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. He was afraid of Queen Jezebel, thinking that she would kill him. He runs away from Mount Carmel to Mount Horeb, and he hides in a cave, and God asks him, Elijah, what are you doing here? And Elijah says, I am burning with zeal for the living God. And God says, you are burning with zeal for the living God, hiding yourself in a cave? Get out of the cave. Stand on the mountain. And there appears the glory of God. There was the wind splitting the stones, God was not there. There was the fire, God was not there. There was the earthquake, God was not there. And then there was the sound of silence. And immediately Elijah comes to know, here is God very close to me, and therefore he wraps his head with his mantle. Going back to the Old Testament, God very clearly said to Moses in chapter 33 verse 20 of Exodus, man shall not see God and live. These are the powerful two individuals. And why God answers, he has something to say from the cloud. Dear friends, cloud is always mysterious. We never see the face of God. We cannot see the face of God and live. And therefore, God appears in the Old Testament, what we call through theophany. It was on Mount Sinai, God appeared with thunder and lightning and smoke and cloud. God appears in a mysterious way. And that's why we call it Mysterium Tremendum. It is a tremendous mystery of God's presence. And that's why there, Peter, John and James, they fall prostrate. They were filled with fear at the word of the Father coming from the cloud. And what God says, this is my beloved Son. I am well pleased with him. Listen to him. Why God says that? Now, Moses, representing law, Elijah, the spirit of the prophets. Now, in Jesus, we find the epitome of all the Old Testament. So here we find Jesus giving us a new law in the New Testament. No more the old law. So God says, do not listen to Moses anymore. Do not listen to the prophets anymore. Now you have to listen to Jesus, my Son. And that's why, dear friends, the revelation we have in Christianity through Christ is the greatest of the revelation. And that's why in the book of Hebrews, in the letter to the Hebrews, we have a clear indication that in Jesus and through Jesus we have revelation, the complete revelation and complete salvific action realized in Jesus. That means we are all saved through the death of Jesus on the cross. Now when we look at this event, dear friends, we need to go deeper into our own life. Now one thing that comes to my mind very clearly, one thing is climbing the mountain. The disciples climbing the mountain. We always climb, we always grow in experience, we always grow in knowledge, we always grow in our experience of pain and relationship, and we always must climb up. There is no climbing down in our life, rather we need to climb up. And what is this climbing up? We need to acquire as much knowledge as we can. Very often, most of our miseries and sufferings, because we do not know. When we know things, we are enlightened. And it is not only the bookish knowledge, but we need to have the knowledge of God through His power and grace. That's why we need to climb in knowledge of God, knowledge of ourselves, and then our sufferings will be lighter. Then what about our relationship? We all know when we were children, we were behaving as children. Today, we do not behave as children. We have climbed up in our relationship. We know what is patience. We know how to control our anger. We know how to control our emotions. That is a growth that happens from within. That is climbing up. What about pain? Pain also teaches us. Pain helps us to grow. Now, I remember one incident that happened. Sometimes the painful experiences actually help us to face challenges of life. We will be very careful also on certain occasions. I remember when I went to Harrison Hot Spring for study week 2 years ago. We were invited for a dinner by one of the priests there very close by Agassi, St. Anthony's Church. That was Father Jack. And we were all together, all the priests, maybe around 15 priests together. We were invited, and Father Jack asked me to open a bottle of pickle. And I tried to open the lid. It was so hard. And then I thought I could open it with a knife. So I put the knife at one end and tried to push it. But that was foolish on my part. The knife entered right, slipped and entered into my finger. And I cut my finger. It was bleeding. Then I told to myself, now you know how to open a pickle bottle. Okay? Never do it with a knife. Now whenever I want to open a bottle of jam or pickle or any other bottle, I never use a knife. So that's an experience. That's why what we say, we climb in our experience, whether it is suffering, knowledge, interpersonal relationship or whatever. Now coming to our belief and our faith experience. Our faith must be always to transform and transfigure. It should never be a transaction. Our life of faith and religion is never a transaction. And what is a transaction and what is a transfiguration or transformation? These are two things to understand. Very often, when we consider religion and faith experience, we understand in terms of transaction. And what is that? I fast, I pray, I go to church, I make my confession, I read Bible, I recite my rosary, I recite my breviary, so that I may get something from God. So I give to God something in order to get something. I go to pilgrimages for favors to receive. That is transaction. It is something like barter system, or you go to a shop, you give money and the shopkeeper will give you things that you want. So that is transaction. But religion should not be. Faith experience should not be. It should be transformation from within. And what is transformation? I give you another example. That example may not fit in very well, but somehow it can explain to us what is our faith experience. For example, if I am overweight, this is no reference to anybody, okay? If I am overweight, I go to a doctor and say, I give you money, reduce my weight. The doctor says, the best thing I can do is to give you some pills. You swallow those pills, maybe your weight will be reduced. So that is giving money and getting some favor. The other way around, transformation, the doctor will say, I will not give you anything. I will not ask you money. I will not give you pills. But what you need to do, go home and do regular exercise. Control your diet. Get up early in the morning. Do your regular exercise 1 hour a day and you will see the results. Your weight will be reduced and you will experience good health. What is that? From within. It happens from within. One thing is a transaction that happens, easy way, get pills, swallow pills and reduce your weight. It may not happen, but if you are regular with exercise, it is a transformation from within. Dear friends, that is why St. Paul very clearly says in the second reading today, in his letter to the Romans chapter 8, who can separate us from the love of Christ? Can hardship, can famine, can nakedness, destruction or distress or sword? Nothing can separate us from the love of Christ because we become stronger. Transformation is this. When we speak of physical life, we may not even think of having 6 packs here with our exercise. Okay? But when we think spiritually, we will have 6 packs in our heart. When life is transformed with the power of Christ and grace of Christ, dear friends, we will have 6 packs in our heart. That is, we will have power to suffer. We will have power of relationship. We will grow in patience. We will grow in our endurance. And nothing will disturb us. And we will march on towards our Savior who died on the cross for us. That is what we call transfiguration. Dear friends, we all transfigure. You know, when we look at our life, look at me. I have transfigured. Have you noticed it? When I came to Guardian Angels, I had more hair. Today I have less hair. It's the same thing with you too. You look at yourself, your old photos, you are looking younger and handsome and beautiful. Now you have transfigured. Physically, we always transfigure. The same thing must be applied, the transfiguration of our spiritual life. So when we are stronger within, we become powerful witnesses to Christ's life. Therefore, dear friends, transfiguration, when we celebrate during this Lenten season, that must help us to become better people. It is not that I do 40 fasts and 80 way of the cross and I do all kinds of devotions during Lenten season, and once I celebrate Easter, I am the same person as I was before. That does not help us. Our fasting does not help us. Our prayers do not help us. What is important is that we target the roots of our transformation. When our heart is changed, when our mind is renewed, we become better people, transformed people, and we will be like Jesus, transfigured with the light of God Himself. Kindly rise before us.